Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, a safe space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a 19-year-old son, Joey, who's in recovery from addiction and who is struggling to find his path. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. We are committed to helping anyone touched by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Today's guest is Kelsay Elizabeth Myers, a professional writer, artist, and somatic movement educator living in Marin County, California. She is passionate about personal and social transformation for trauma healing. She's a Korean transnational adoptee who has been on a healing journey the last several years after spending the first 32 years of her life in self-destructive behavior patterns. Kelsay founded Dialogical Persona Healing Arts, where she offers individual and group coaching programs and online courses that use expressive arts and transformational processes to help others discover new ways of understanding themselves, reclaim their creative flow, and feel more settled in their whole system so they too can experience more power, excitement, and joy in life. She's currently a Ph.D. student of Transformative Inquiry at California Institute of Integral Studies, where she uses a variety of psychological approaches and arts-based research practices for trauma integration and wholeness. Whew! I am exhausted reading all of that. That is an amazing resume. Welcome. Welcome, Kelsay. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
There's a lot in that introduction that I want to dig into. I really am into alternative healing modalities, and I really want to hear about that. But I want to just hear first, just a real quick background of your adoption story, your childhood, growing up, kind of just the basics so people can kind of see where you're coming from.
I was adopted to a really loving couple in Grand Rapids, Michigan area, and grew up in a small town called Lowell right outside of it. And my dad was actually the community banker and the town mayor, and my mother is very involved in the Democratic politics there. So I had a very sort of protected childhood because everyone knew who I was and who my parents were. So I could really just have kind of a normal, as we say, childhood where we rode our bikes to the graveyard, and I had friends. I was like on the cheerleading squad for a year and then involved in different arts groups and theater and straight A student, that kind of thing. And then when I got to college, it was really the first time that I was on my own where people didn't know who I was. And then it became much more about my race. And I started facing a lot of racism, just kind of microaggression comments, and as well as just in the curriculum, which was very white at the private liberal arts college I was at, not a whole lot of diversity. And then I experienced my first explicit kind of experience of racism when these three guys in a white minivan rolled up and yelled, "Go back to China," and Kung Fu and a bunch of other just racial slurs at me. And around the same time, my philosophy professor asked if I spoke Chinese in class because he needed an example of a language he didn't speak. And so those two experiences kind of happening right around the same time really just threw me into a huge identity crisis and awakening as an adoptee, as an activist, and to the idea that who I am as a person isn't always how other people see me, and that dichotomy of how can I define myself when there are so many other ways that people want to define me.
Yeah. I can relate to so much of what you're saying from what my son, who I adopted from Japan, has experienced in his school career. He had microaggressions every single day in a very white school. And I was actually shocked because he didn't tell me about this until he was in crisis, but I was shocked at how horrible people are to Asian people. I was like, really? It would have never dawned on me. And it didn't dawn on me. And I feel stupid about that because I should have been more aware and helped him better. But I could not believe it. But obviously it happens. And, we just have had these horrible, horrible shootings in Asian communities. And Asians have really been hit hard lately the last couple of years. So I'm so sorry for all that you've been through. And it sounds really terrible.
Yeah.
When you were growing up, did you kind of identify as white because you were in a small white town? Did you sort of did you kind of feel white, or did you always feel different racially?
I did feel white and really kind of could pass as white just because, like I said, people knew who my parents were, and it was a very small community and mostly of people who had known me since, my parents adopted me. So it was easy to forget. And there were a couple times, that people teased me on the playground, but my parents went to the principal and complained, and the kid got in trouble and never spoke to me again. So I could go on and forget and really buy into that idea that, oh, I am just like everybody else. And similar to you, my mom had no idea that she kind of bought into that model minority myth where she thought that even if there were stereotypes against Asians, they were so positive. So nobody would really,
Yeah, I guess I was guilty of that. I thought, well, what's the harm in people asking for you to help with their homework? But I guess that's really harmful because that's what happened to my son. They'd be like, you're good at math. You do this for me, stuff like that. Did that happen to you too?
Not as much because I was not good at math. So
breaking the stereotypes. I love it.
People did not ask me to do their math homework, and yeah, I had a very small kind of close-knit group of friends, and really, I was part of that first wave of millennial kind of helicopter parenting where our parents were all very involved. Most of my class was straight A students and with huge parental involvement in our schooling.
All across the board. Yeah. Okay, very good. Well, that's all very interesting. And I hope that anyone listening who's not Asian or not a person of color will kind of get the idea that we white people need to be better at keeping track of what's going on and helping out, right? We should be helping to alleviate bullying and microaggressions if we see them, even if they're, can you do my homework because you're Asian and you are good at math? Even still, that's seeing a person just as their race and not as a whole person, and that feels terrible, right?
Yes, definitely.
All right. Very good. Okay. So can you parse out how much did racism contribute to your trauma and how much of it was just adoption? Can you parse out the two? Which is worse, or I don't know, it's not like a competition, but when you deal with intercountry adoption or transracial adoption within the US, you're dealing with two big problems, right?
Yeah, I feel like they're very interconnected, but there are ways to sort of look at the different strands. And for me, I dealt with the race strand first, and that brought me to actually exploring my adoption and what being an adoptee meant to me through studying the race thing, because I also didn't feel like I fit into the second generation Asian American story either, being an adoptee, having white parents, and being able to actually have a lot of the white privilege that comes with that. So,
right. So you were missing that tiger mom kind of situation at your house. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That stereotype.
Right. And just also the way that my friends who are second generation Asian American, they have more ties to culture. They have more of that, the experience of their Asian culture, and as well as having immigrant parents, or just the expectations that come with that, the survival struggles that come with that really affect how they're raised, that I didn't have.
That is quite a different paradigm, being a child of an immigrant versus an adoptee. Very different. Yeah. Do you get mixed up, or do people care what country you're from? Like, what kind of Asian are you? Where are you from? Do you get that kind of thing a lot? Or did you in school?
Definitely. I got it a lot when I was in college, and a little bit when I was in the East Bay, and not so much here in Marin, but throughout most of my 20s, that was a very, very common question. And some people would just guess. Actually, I was surprised when a few times people would actually guess Korea, because usually it is, are you Chinese or something like that, the more common ones.
How does it feel as a person of color to have these quizzes by strangers? What does that do to you when people ask you, where are you from?
It used to really, really bother me. I would get very angry and it would kind of set me off. But having done a lot more healing and trauma integration work over the past 6 to 10 years, now I don't actually get very triggered by it, and I can respond. Sometimes I will take the moment to just do the teaching educational thing, or I'll just, respond to the question without being so triggered.
Right. I have to admit, I have asked people before I was a little bit more understanding about what's going on. But now if I am curious, I ask myself, why does it matter? What difference will it make if they're Korean or Chinese or whatever? How will that change anything? And the answer is nothing, really nothing. Well, can you describe in college and after college, you said in your bio, you struggled for 32 years with self-destructive patterns. Can you, whatever parts of those that you're willing to share, just so people can understand kind of how that trauma manifested in you? And then we'll definitely get to the healing part.
Sure. Yeah, so I really wasn't aware until after I had sort of a string of abusive relationships between the years of 29 to 32, because I had spent most of my 20s really immersed in academia and learning, and in that sense was sort of protected. And, before that, I had my family and was hanging out with my parents a lot. So I hadn't really had the opportunity to date. And so when that happened around the time I was 29 and was like, oh my gosh, I've missed out on all of these opportunities, and started hanging out in the lesbian scene here in San Francisco and exploring different dating opportunities through these lesbian crews, it hadn't dawned on me that I could really lose myself in another person, in their energy, what they wanted me to be, just so that I wouldn't lose the relationship. And that there was this part of me that was still very informed by that feeling of abandonment and rejection, and that would really self-abandon so that I could be in the relationship rather than, again, staying true to who I am and what my identity is, what my beliefs are, versus how other people were defining me. So that has really been the biggest struggle for me that I see is really coming from that first sort of, surrendering when I was born.
Right. I can understand how, the attachment issues that are inherent in adoption because of the maternal separation, that would appear as kind of over-reliance on other people to fill you up or to identify yourself with. Am I summarizing that okay?
Yeah, it was, because I really did feel like there was this sort of desert or this hole inside of me that couldn't be filled. And I kept trying to fill it with other people or, the relationship. And in fact, one older woman that I had been in sort of this romantic triangle entanglement with actually touched my body everywhere and told me that my birth mother had to love me because she had had an abortion, and my mother had actually given birth to me.
Oh.
And so I was like, I know.
Yeah, that's really heavy.
Right.
Oh,
yeah. But it was the first time that I had felt any sort of energy running through my body. I had been very dissociated from it. Actually, in the course of my therapy, I did sort of uncover that in the first 3 months that I had been in foster care in Korea, that I had been sexually abused. So I really hadn't felt my body before I entirely dissociated from it. So.
Oh, wow. How old were you when you were adopted? I guess I never got that part.
Well, from birth, but you have to be 3 months old to fly. So I had been in foster care from the time I was born until I could be flown to Michigan.
Oh, and so through your healing work, intuitively, you figured out that during that time you had been abused. You didn't find out from someone else. You just found it out from yourself, right?
Yeah, well, I was doing like a Kegel Kundalini exercise, and I had the felt sense memory. I didn't really see it, but I just kind of knew in my body.
Wow. So felt sense. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, in the somatic world, we use the term felt sense to distinguish it from sort of the lived experience or an experience that you're having in the moment. It's this knowing that happens that you can feel and sense in your system without really having to know external confirmation or necessarily to, again, like to see it happening like you would recalling a memory, but just this knowing that happens, that your body's organizing system just knows.
Is it like when you kind of have a feeling of not trusting someone, or kind of like those gut feelings? Is that the felt sense, or is that something different?
That's definitely the sense of it. And then if there is this feeling aspect too that brings in the emotional awareness, then yes, that's definitely an example.
Yeah. Okay. So in your late 20s, dating kind of brought up your attachment issues that were unresolved from your adoption. And then you spend a few years kind of navigating that, which is what people do in their 20s and 30s a lot of times. I'm sure you're not alone with that, but I'm sure it was very painful. And how did you get out of it? How did you find healthy relationships, or what kind of healers came your way to help you?
I had started doing five rhythms and open floor, these two forms of conscious dancing, since one of the women that I had been entangled with was actually one of the teachers. And that practice really helped me navigate through that terrain. And it also, I met my somatic experiencing practitioner through that community, as well as my therapist. And at the time when all of those relationships were sort of exploding and I was really starting to assert who I was more, that was in conflict with the group dynamics, I had suicidal ideation throughout my 20s, but it came back in a really big way. And so my mom flew out, and there was a therapist here in the dance community who reached out to me, and I started working with her. And through the combination of just doing the movement practice, the therapy, and somatic experiencing really intensely for a 6-year period where, I was pretty much every day, 12 hours focused on some sort of self-development and self-growth for the full 6 years. I really, yeah, I was very immersed, and it paid off though. It was what helped me to survive and make sense and come back to myself in a much healthier and more whole way.
Wow. Yeah, you seem like the type of person that doesn't do anything halfway. You're like, all in.
Pretty much, yes.
I love that. That's good. I'm kind of the same way too. Okay, so let me figure out what this dance situation is. You're not just talking like ballet or jazz dancing. This is dance for therapeutic purposes. What did you call it? Conscious dance?
Yeah, they call it conscious dance because it involves the somatic therapeutic component as well as just, it's more intuitive movement. So it's more like if you're meditating, but also using your body and bringing in the dance and connecting with other people. And if you go to classes and workshops like I was, the teacher guides you through when to be more internal and meditative, when to be more releasing and shaking out and kind of having that discharge of energy, when to connect with others in very specific ways, and how to use your body to really either release or integrate or get to know more of the stories that have been held there and the patterns that have been held in very specific body parts.
Wow, it's fascinating. And I have never delved into this field at all. So it's all a little bit new to me. And honestly, it sounds a little terrifying because I don't even like dancing, like line dancing when people are telling me what to do. So, and I know now you teach this modality, right? Or this is one of the things you work with other people with?
Yeah, I've trained in the Tamalpa Institute Life Art Process, which is a form of conscious dance, but it goes a little bit deeper into the stories that are held and uses different arts modalities as well, like writing and drawing and ritual.
Okay, so not just dance, but dance and art, all sorts of art. That's amazing. And I do love that. I'm a musician. I get it. I get it that art can heal. I've often said my music has saved my life many times, and I really love that part. But pretend that I was willing to do this conscious dancing. We'll just start with the dancing part. I would feel so self-conscious. How do you help people get past that?
It's really common. I was very self-conscious too. And I have actually been trained in dance in my youth, but pretty much everyone when they start is really self-conscious because it is, we're being seen and we're using our physical bodies, and it can be very scary for people. So the first step really is just getting the body to move and having movement be as safe as possible. So it can be as small, like breathing is a good place to start because that is movement. Our chest will naturally rise and fall. Our belly will naturally rise and fall as we're breathing. And just to be aware that that is movement, and then start with something easy like a finger or a shoulder or a foot, something that, again, just gets the body moving. And the more that we actually can stay with the body's movement, the less in our heads we are. And so the less self-conscious we'll feel.
Yes, I've lived in my head my whole life. I'm getting better, But yeah, for a long time, you could have cut me off at my neck and I would have been just fine with that. I didn't relate at all to the rest of my body, but I'm getting better. I'm trying to integrate because I understand. I'm reading The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I'm sure you know about that book. And he advocates strongly that the healing of trauma does not happen in the front part of your brain where everyone tries to fix things with words and with, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is great for some things, but it doesn't really get to trauma because trauma lives deeper. And the body is such a great way to process it, right? And that's what somatic is, right? The body, soma, any of these somatic practices is using the body, like quite literally, to heal trauma, right?
Exactly. One of the founders of Five Rhythms, Gabrielle Roth, said, if you put your body into motion, the psyche heals itself.
Ooh.
Yeah, which I have found to be true. When we are able to get out of the mind and be in the body, our system knows where the trauma is and how to heal it if we just listen and receive that wisdom. And again, doing these somatic exercises with a coach like me or with a therapist who's trained to really know to help you facilitate that experience of going deeper into it through the body and either releasing or integrating, it can help to resolve a lot of it.
I bet. I believe in it for sure.
As we move and as we really go into the stories there, they'll tell us things that maybe aren't necessarily what we had been thinking, but that we're feeling at that feeling sense level, right?
There's so much we hold in our bodies. And like, how long would a session last that you do with people?
I do 90-minute sessions because it is such deep work, and that allows time to really do some check-in, some initial sort of just laying the landscape of what's happening for my clients, then going into either a movement, a drawing, a writing.
Do you kind of move in and out of the different modalities, like different creative art forms?
I do. And it really depends on what the person's material is at that moment, which one we go into. And but there usually is some component of movement, drawing, writing, and then verbal coaching too. And
sure.
Yeah, so that it kind of follows that arc of activation and settling. So yeah.
And probably some debriefing at the end and integration work.
Yes.
So you can go back to work or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. You've used this sort of somatic work to heal your trauma around racism. Is that true? Can you help me figure out how those two go together?
Well, it's not necessarily that I heal the racism, right? Because racism still exists in the world.
Oh, yeah. Right. Oh, I wish you could heal that.
But I was able to, like I said, I don't get triggered so much around it. And if I do, I can come back to myself a lot quicker just because I've built up the resources within my body that I can go to if I do get triggered, so that it doesn't last as long. I don't feel the anger to the extent that I used to. And I can really just come back to my own self-soothing or, co-regulation with others as needed. Yeah, so that I don't feel the effects of other people's judgments in my own system.
That's really great because you can't control what other people are going to say or do.
Yeah.
They'll do stupid shit all the time, and you just have to figure out how to manage it within your own self. So that's really useful for a lot of things. I suppose that same process would be for any sort of triggers around your adoption or attachment issues, right? If you, I don't know, whatever triggers you going through the day, or somebody brings up something about your adoption, or do you use those same kind of techniques to help smooth those out too?
Definitely. And the other thing that comes about just through the integration of the stories is that I'm much more secure in who I am, so that other people's opinions or whatever they bring, I know that it's theirs and not mine. So I just don't take it on. And I can really stay in my own value system and in my own sense of self a lot more.
You've really learned who your authentic self is, or your higher self, or your core, or whatever people use those words.
Exactly.
Right? That's really great. Is this something that is only good for adults, or can you do this with kids? Is it something that kids resonate with?
Well, kids naturally are creative and they naturally will play together. They will dress up and do performances. They will make art and move. So they do take to the work. You can't necessarily go into the psychology aspects as much. You can do the same movements, but, just say like with kids, it's more like, oh, move like a dolphin or move like a panther rather than just sort of, oh, naturally move the way your body needs to do this story kind of thing.
Okay.
I don't work with children. I work with adults because I like to go into the deeper story and the psychological material, but
kids wouldn't be ready for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly movement is very healing for kids. I used to always get so mad at the teachers in Joey's elementary school. He was a busy boy, probably a trauma response. He has a very big flight response and he was just always running everywhere. But if he ever got in trouble in school, they took away his recess. I'm like, what are you doing that for? He needs to move. He needs to get that out. So I think movement is really important. And I was going to tell you too, I started doing taiko drumming, which is sort of dance. It's dance and drumming together, but it's big movements and very loud and explosive. And oh my gosh, that has been so healing for me. And it's not explicitly for healing, but man, it has healed me in many ways. It's been so great. So I really understand through the taiko drumming. And if anyone's not familiar with taiko, it's the Japanese drumming, those big giant drums with your arms flailing about and in unison with the whole team. So it's really great. But is that the kind of energy you use, right?
It is, because it's movement, right? And also with sound and drumming, you have the beat that beats through your body too. So, drumming, music, voice things are also part of the work. But what you said about teachers taking away recess from children is really important. Because even if you're not necessarily explicitly bringing the psychological material in with children, the effect is the same, because when they're moving things through their body, they are healing. And so taking that away is very detrimental. And anything, that puts children in their bodies and not so much in their minds is going to help as they grow with being able to recall those body resources in their muscle memory and just in their own, somatic awareness. So.
Definitely. I remember we went to kind of a hippie preschool. I loved it. And they didn't mind if kids walked around when kids were supposed to be in circle. They could walk around as long as they didn't hurt anyone or themselves. But they recognized that some kids just can't sit still and listen. That's just not part of what they can do at that point. So I appreciate that when people can give people a little space to do what they need to do. What about people that have chronic fatigue syndrome or autoimmune issues where it seems like your body's kind of attacking itself? Is that related to trauma? And if so, can this somatic movement help move some of that through?
Yeah, most of the people in the conscious dance communities have some sort of autoimmune or chronic physical condition, which is why the conscious dance is really wonderful, because you go at your own pace, and because there are no steps or energetic expectations, you can really listen and do what your body needs for itself without any expectation of having to be wild and out there. Although some people, that is what their body needs. So there is that too. But yeah, there is definitely a link between these conditions that we have in our physical body and trauma, because trauma is held in the body and it will come out in all sorts of ways, like illness or less or more energy. So, the more that we can be aware of how our body is responding in these conditions that we have because of the trauma, then the more we have to work with, and the more that we can not necessarily heal those conditions, but again, the way that we respond and the energy that we have in order to go about our day can shift radically.
Now, besides the somatic work and this creative arts healing, are there any other things that you do? You've done all sorts of interesting trainings and things. Is there anything else that you have in your hip pocket?
I do. I do a lot of different things, and I have pulled from a lot of different modalities as a transdisciplinary scholar and just in my own interests and my own healing process. The foundation of it really is the somatic and trauma healing, and through the Tomoko Life Art process mainly, as well as soul-based coaching, which really works at the level of metaphors. And I also do Reiki energy healing, sometimes in my coaching programs and other times just for individual sessions. But all of those really work together at getting sort of out of the mind and into a more integrative heart, body, spirit space.
Yeah, that is so wonderful that you do that, because most people are just mind, 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 mind. I've struggled with my son, trying to help him with his issues since he was 15 and had his first mental health crisis. And our healthcare system, that's the only place they deal with you, is in the mind, and medicine. Give you pills. Here, take these 5, 6, 7 pills. And then they give you talk therapy, and just does not do anything. It doesn't get anywhere near close to what he needs. So he also just spent about a month in a rehab. He's in recovery and just working really hard. But for a month, they didn't move these people. They sat and did group talks and worksheets. And I said, did they ever take you on a walk or a hike or on the treadmill or anything? Nope. They just sat. And I thought, holy cow, how are you supposed to heal with that? I think our culture is just so, maybe our whole culture is in our brains and not in our bodies. Is that what you think? It must be frustrating for you.
Well, it is, but I also really understand it, because I've also led for the first 32 years of my life was really very much in my mind.
Okay.
And that is, it's part of the culture. It's part of that mind body split. That goes back to the Renaissance period with Descartes. And
I think therefore I am.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, our Western culture and the world just kind of took that on. And also, I think it has a lot to do with trauma, because we've had traumatic experiences throughout history, and that Descartes too lived through wars and famines. So the mind is a safe place to go, because the body is physically in pain, and the emotions are so, as you mentioned earlier, can be so overwhelming to the system that we do go to our minds as a coping mechanism, because that's where it does feel good. Sure. So
yeah. Oh, you're so nice to help us not feel bad about it. Oh my gosh. Coming back to your adoption, and I'm not saying anything bad about your parents. They sound lovely, lovely people. But is there any advice you have for adoptive parents like me who adopted kids from another country? Is there any way we can do better for our kids that might be a different race?
I think so. A lot of it really is just openness, transparency, letting your child know that you are a safe place to go to talk or to bring any of the issues that might come up for them to. My parents were not very proactive about the race thing, but they were about adoption. I can't think of a time I didn't know I was adopted, or where they weren't encouraging me to come to them with anything that came up, or, they were very aware of those issues, but the race was a blind spot. And, when I did first try to talk about it with my mom, she did get very defensive when I was saying, oh, white people are this. So that was really a struggle that we both had to work through in the relationship that did kind of drive us apart for a year or so. And so when they come to you, try and be as supportive and not bring your stuff into it as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because when I was triggered, I couldn't really, handle anything more. So.
Right. Yeah. You don't need our stuff on top of your stuff. Yeah. So adoptive parents, go get your own therapy.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Get your stuff worked on ahead of time, ideally. Yeah. But even, you might not even realize what else is in there until, you have a teenager staring at you and, bringing all sorts of stuff up for you. So we can work on ourselves as well. And is there anything else you'd like to talk about or mention that I haven't asked you about?
No, I can't think of anything. This was really wonderful for this opportunity, Beth. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm so glad I found you. I listened to Leela Davis's podcast because I was on it once, and now I keep listening to it, called What I Didn't Tell My Therapist. Is that right? And you are the new co-host. And Leela was on our show, as was the old co-host, Jude. And I'll put links to those. And now you're the new co-host, and you and Leela are all over the holistic wellness, whole body, mind, spirit situation, right?
We are. Yes.
That's your bag. Nice.
Definitely. Yes.
So good luck with that venture and good luck with your studies. And I just am really impressed with all the stuff you've got going on. And I hope people will go look you up. What is the best way to find you?
The best way to find me is on my website, dialogicalpersona.com. All of my socials are linked there, as well as ways to email me and contact me. I am on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, all under Dialogical Persona as well.
Okay, great. And dialogical is with a D as in dog. What does that mean?
Yes.
Like dialogue?
Yeah, it's the ways that we can dialogue with ourselves. And for me, I use the term persona rather than self, just because there is more of a distance and a way that we can kind of imagine and play with it when it is a persona. And also because, it's just an aspect of ourselves, one aspect, or, the many that we cover in our work together. It's not the whole thing. Yeah.
Very interesting. I'm fascinated by what you're doing. And I wish you all the best. And everyone go check out Kelsay's work.
Thank you.
And please share this episode with anyone you know that might be an intercountry adoption family, or someone that might be looking for an alternative healing modality for a trauma or a situation that they haven't been able to crack yet. Maybe this is the piece of it that you're missing, the somatic piece. So find Kelsay or another somatic kind of, what do you call him? Practitioner? Somatic experiencing practitioner, perhaps, or things like that. And go read The Body Keeps the Score, because that will explain why this is so important. And you can find Unraveling Adoption on social media and at our website, unravelingadoption.com. And we have a Patreon account. If you'd like to help make sure our podcast remains commercial free, you can donate a small amount every month. Patreon makes it really easy. It's patreon.com/unravelingadoption. And if you're an adoptive parent, I would invite you to join our group called Aptitude, a support group for adoptive parents facing adoption challenges. And I'm very excited that this month's special guest at our monthly Aptitude Speaker Forum is Kelsay. She's going to be here with us on March 19th, 2023. Our session is going to go from 4 to 5:30 Pacific time. It's a free group. All you have to do is be an adoptive parent willing to look at this kind of stuff. Foster parents and kinship parents are also welcome. To join, just go to unravelingadoption.com/aptitude. And there's also a link in the show notes. Well, thank you all for listening. Thanks again, Kelsay, for being here. You're delightful, and I just wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And Kelsay and I want you all to stay safe.